Hello, everybody. Steven Ruderman here with your Insomniac Lunatic Fringe Giants postgame show. And I just don't know what else to say. After three straight seasons of mediocre baseball, two of which, 2022 and 2023, in which the Giants went from well over 500 in 2022, 10 games over, in 2023, 13 games over, to under 500. Finishing 81 and 81 in 2022, 79 and 83 in 2023, and 80 and 82 last year. The Giants got off to an incredible start. They started off 8 and 1 and started off 24 and 14. And this year certainly felt different than the last 3 years. It was 3 years of mediocre baseball. And finally, this team was the team that was going to bring excitement and magic back to San Francisco. And despite a rough couple of months, the Giants still grinded. They still battled. And they went on to win 7 out of 9 just 3 weeks ago. Highlighted by Patrick Bailey's walk-off inside the park home run on July 8th, one of the most magical wins, you could argue, in Giants history. They then won a big game against the Dodgers to open their series on July 11th. And then they lost 12 out of 14. They went 2 and 12 to fall all the way under 500 for the first time this season. 6 games back of the Padres for the third wild card spot. And they were swept by the Pirates. And they went 0-6 on this homestand. Going 0-6. The Giants went 0-6 on a homestand for the first time since 1896. That's right. Not 1996, not 1986, 1896. 5 years before the start of modern baseball, the modern era of baseball, which began in 1901. Grover Cleveland was the president of the United States back then. The Giants get swept by the Mets and the Pirates. And after a very tough loss last night, the Giants came in today with their stopper, Logan Webb, on the mound, looking to avoid the sweep on a peaceful, tranquil, overcast day at Oracle Park. I was there in the press box with my friend Bruce McGowan and my boss and friend, the great Lee Leonard. And we were also hanging out with Amari P. Gonzalez, the former Spanish voice of the A's, also was the Spanish voice for the Giants for a time, and even the Mariners for a little bit. I'm trying to remember if Amari was with the Angels. Anyway, at 1:25, news broke that the Giants had traded Tyler Rogers to the Mets. Buster Posey was adamant that the Giants were going to be buyers. It turns out the trade was for 2 prospects. The Giants traded for Jose Butto, who is part of the Mets bullpen, so he is a major leaguer. But he was really the third guy. The other 2 guys who came over were prospects. And that signaled that the Giants were selling and in reality kicking the tires on the 2025 season. It felt as if today was it. You could feel it at the ballpark. It was a pitcher's duel. Logan Webb, who had struggled in his first 2 starts since the All-Star break, getting in and out of jams in the first 5 innings in Toronto on July 19th before the Blue Jays got to him for 4 runs in the bottom of the 6th, then gave up 6 runs to the Mets last Friday. He looked like his old self today. They'd get out of a couple jams in the 2nd and the 4th. And the Giants didn't have to face Paul Skeens in this series, but they did face Mike Burrows, and he retired the first 9 men he faced today. A good old-fashioned pitcher's duel. The Giants would get on the board in the fourth inning, runners at first and second. 2 outs after base hits by Elliot Ramos and Malia Damas. Dominic Smith. It's a base hit to right field, a line drive base hit to right field on a fastball right down the pipe. A line drive base hit. Something the Giants were doing a lot of early in the season. Finally, Jung-Hoo Lee comes up. And he finally hits one the other way. But unfortunately, left fielder Jack Sawinski made a great diving catch to end the inning. The Pirates would just as quickly tie the game in the top of the fifth. The Webb got out of further damage with a 1-2-3 double play. Webb ended up going 5 1/3. Gave up 5 hits. He walked 4, but he struck out 11. Hey, this is the Logan Webb we all know and love. The game ended up going extras. Ryan Walker came into the game. And O'Neill Cruz was the Manfred runner at second base. Pirates would have runners at the corners and 1 out. With Henry Davis at the plate. Cruz was at third. Jack Sawinski, who had just walked, was at first. Davis hits a chopper back to the mound. Walker had O'Neill Cruz dead to rights in between third base and home plate. For whatever reason, he chose to try and start a double play. Throws to second where they don't get Sawinski, but they do get Henry Davis at first. And O'Neill Cruz scores the go-ahead run to give the Pirates a 2-1 lead. So Isaac Mattson, who pitched a scoreless bottom of the ninth for Pittsburgh, he's back out in the bottom of the 10th. Jung-Hoo Lee's the Manfred runner. Casey Schmidt, it's a fly ball to left, but Sawinski loses it in the sun, which was starting to kind of peek through the clouds. It was actually a really beautiful day at Oracle Park today. And a big break, the ball falls into the Giants have runners at first and second. Mike Yastrzemski laid down a perfect sacrifice bunt to move the runners to second and third. And Patrick Bailey jumped out to a 3-0 count. It felt as if the Giants were making one last valiant rally to try and save this season. But Bailey ended up striking out, as did Elliot Ramos. And in perfect Giants fashion, they wasted it. Pirates won 2-1. The Giants are indeed under 500 at 54 and 55. They are 6 games back of the Padres for the third wild card with 53 games to go. I said if the Giants don't get going soon and really get things going in the next 3 weeks after the 7 games against the Padres, 3 at Oracle and 2 weeks, 4 at Petco in 3 weeks, that this season will be over. Well, Buster sent shockwaves by trading Tyler Rogers for the 2 prospects. And then said that Camilo Doval, where it was reported that Camilo Doval would be available. And you were kind of wondering at first, is this a buy-sell? No, they're selling. And just 3 weeks after the Giants were 9 games over 500, and just 4 games back of the Dodgers in the National League West, the Giants held a playoff spot. The Giants have officially punted on the 2025 season. Now, I wanted Buster not to do a tear-down rebuild, but to start building one of the weakest farm systems in baseball and start preparing for the future. Though I was hoping they would start doing that after the season. I wanted them to go for it this season. So I'm kind of getting what I wanted here, but I had a lot of emotions go through my mind as the game ended, and as I was walking back from the ballpark to the Montgomery Street BART station. I was walking on 2nd Street to the Montgomery Street BART station. And it just, in a way, it feels surreal that this season which was going to be the season that brought fans back. The Giants have sold out more than 20 games this year. The Giants hadn't sold out more than 10 games since 2018. They've sold out more than 20 games this year. Right now, they're on pace to draw 2.9 million. And we're really at a point where if they kept drawing crowds like these, I mean, Giants drew 2 sellout crowds on a Monday and Tuesday night against the Phillies 3 weeks ago. They drew 35,000 on this past Monday night, 38,000 on Tuesday night last night, 38,000 on a Wednesday afternoon today. They're at a point where if they kept doing this and kept playing good baseball, there was a good chance they were going to hit the 3 million mark. And this magical season has suddenly become the 4th straight season of mediocre Giants baseball. And Buster Posey has punted to 2026 and beyond. It is obvious that Buster is looking towards the future, and it is even more obvious that his focus is now on 2026 and beyond. They see 2025 as pretty much a lost cause. Mathematically, look, they're 6 back with 53 to go. They're 6 back with 53 to go. And you never know what can happen. But I think Buster took a lot of things into account. Bob Melvin in his press conference last night talked about team meetings. Team meetings plural, which meant they weren't working. I was in the clubhouse prior to the game. I wanted to get a look-see. And it wasn't the worst clubhouse, but it wasn't the same vibe that it was earlier this season. The morale seemed to be down. The morale seemed to be pretty low. And I think Buster took that into account. I think he took into account the fact that the National League is pretty strong and the fact that the Padres are really good and that they may end up as a third wild card winning 90 games. You look at the fact that the second place finishers in the National League Central and National League East are going to be the first 2 wild cards, and they're not going to go anywhere. You factor in that you don't have tiebreakers anymore. The playoff spots are determined if teams are tied by head-to-head records. It probably was going to take, at the very least, 89 wins. Possibly even up to 92 or even 93 wins for the Giants to get into the playoffs. Buster took all of that into account, and he was adamant that the Giants were in win-now mode this season. But I said, and I was saying for the last week, this is not sustainable. This is not a win-now roster as much as people want to think it is. They're far from the worst team. They're not a bad team. They're a decent team. But this is not the kind of roster that you can just win now and just not think about the future. Because one, this isn't a roster that's just good. That's good enough to sustain itself for many years. Two, this is year 4 of this win now roster. And they're going to get old. They could probably give you another similar season next year, maybe 2027 if they're very lucky, 2028. But at some point between 2027 and 2029, they're going to collapse. And Buster took all of this into account and I think realized we got to prepare for the future and we got to build the farm system. I do believe what we saw today was the beginning of a rebuild. It's not a tear-down rebuild, but I actually would use the word rebuild. It sounds like the Giants are prepared for a rebuild. They got to rebuild the farm system. You still have some guys here who are going to be around, who you can build around. You got Elliot Ramos and Logan Webb. You've got Matt Chapman and Willie Adames. Randy Rodriguez perhaps as a closer. Bryce Eldridge coming up next season. And he's not ready this season. Have him up next year. Buster took this all into account and realized we got to plan for the future. And he realized this is not a win-now roster. And that this is not a sustainable plan. Buster's a smart baseball guy. He knows what he's doing. And even though they're only 6 back with 53 to go and anything can happen, this team, they're probably going to trade Duvall. They're going to possibly trade even more guys. I wouldn't be surprised if Wilmer Flores and or Mike Yastrzemski get dealt. So the roster's about to get a lot weaker. You've pretty much sent the message that we're focusing on next year. I hate to say this, and Kyle said it too. This season is pretty much over. That's it. And now it is 4 years. And if major changes aren't made, 4 years and counting of mediocre Giants baseball. My friend Vinny Shestoni, one of the producers of this show, has often says, I feel teased. I feel teased. Yeah, the last 4 years, we felt teased. All 4 years, they went in with high expectations. Obviously, 2022 was an older team and wasn't the greatest team, but after the 107-win season, we were all riding high. But I remember Kyle insisting to me in 2021, like, hey, next year's team's probably going to be like an 85 to 87-win team. And he wasn't that far off. 2022 was disappointing, but it was, there was maybe a little, and it was very mediocre and boring. But you could tolerate it because they had just won 107 the year before. But 2023, there were expectations. And then they were 13 games over 500 after winning the resumption of a suspended game on July 19th in Cincinnati. And then they had an historic collapse, went 79 and 83. It was extremely disappointing. And it saw Gabe Kapler lose his job. Last year, they brought in Matt Chapman and Jung-Hoo Lee, Jorge Soler. Fans, they sold out all 3 games of the opening weekend series against the Padres, the home opening weekend series against the Padres. They could never get it going. Lee separated his shoulder in May and was out for the season. May 12th to be exact. And the Giants went 80 and 82. This year, they brought in Willy Adames. Buster Farhan was gone. Buster was the new guy. They signed Willy Adames. They had an incredible spring training, and Buster built this team based around doing everything, hitting home runs, playing small ball, playing situational baseball, pitching defense, and they were stealing a lot of bases. And it got them a nice spring training, and it gave them a great 24-14 start. And then for whatever reason, from May 9th and beyond, they just went back to the failed Farhan strategy of trying to hit home runs. They weren't stealing bases. And I'm a bit upset about this. This is incredibly disappointing. This is a disappointing season. And it's just amazing how quickly it fell apart in just the span of 3 weeks. Kyle says mediocrity is worse than being really bad. It's weird. I don't agree with that, but I can understand why someone might feel that way. But please do explain why you feel that way. And Kyle mentions it's a seller's market too. We're going to show the standings here. And the National League, which appeared to be strong, it's possible we might only get 6 teams that finish over 500, and that's the 6 teams that go to the playoffs. It's very possible the 6 teams that are going to the playoffs in the National League could be determined within even the next couple weeks. We already know that the Phillies, the Mets, the Brewers, the Cubs, and the Dodgers are going to the playoffs. And as you can see, the Padres have a 3-game lead over the Reds, who I think, Tito could work some magic with them, but I think they're probably about a year off. I expect the Reds will be really good next year. There's a very good chance that the 6 teams that hold, and I would say probably well over 50% chance that the 6 teams that hold playoff spots right now in the National League are going to be the 6 teams that go to the playoffs. But this has been a bit of an interesting season. One of the big themes in baseball this year has been teams hovering around 500, getting hot to get well above 500, and then crashing to get below 500, only to get hot again and get back over 500. We've seen numerous teams throughout baseball, the Reds included, the Diamondbacks, the Rangers, the Red Sox, the Mariners. Unfortunately, you could even say in a weird way the Giants turned out to be one of those teams. But you could see the Reds are 3 back, the Cardinals 5.5. Now, last year, it looked like the 6 teams in the National League had been settled by early August. And the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Phillies, the Braves, the Mets, and the Diamondbacks, and then, or not the Mets, I mean, wait. The Dodgers, the Brewers, the Phillies, the Padres, the Braves and the Diamondbacks, and then the Mets, just came out of nowhere. Though they were kind of getting there in August, and they were because I was saying on post games a year ago, it's like it looks like the 6 teams in the National League are decided. Maybe the Reds are that team this year. I doubt it. I really have a hard time seeing the Cardinals. The Giants are pretty much done. But you look at the standings right now. The Padres are 60 and 49. The Reds are 57 and 52. And suddenly, only a few weeks ago, it was 10 teams over 500 in the National League. Now it's only 7. And if the Reds finish under 500, which I wouldn't rule out, it may end up being just 6. And I'm just like in total shock about over just how quickly this happened. How we went from 3 weeks ago, the Giants having a playoff spot, to suddenly we're playing for next year. And it is going to be, they haven't even announced the pitchers yet for when the Giants start the road trip in New York on Friday. As you can see, these were the standings on July 11th after the Giants went against the Dodgers. The Giants were 52 and 43 and had a half-game lead for the third wild card over the Padres. On July 11th, the Giants had a half-game lead for the third wild card spot, 3 days out from the All-Star break. And just 20, and less than 3 weeks later, just 19 days later, they have officially given up on the season. And the Giants are now 6 back with 53 games to go. And you could say, look, the Giants, I think, may have had this exact same record through 109 games in 1987. But the Giants did make big deals. They traded for Kevin Mitchell. They traded for Rick Russell. And it was just a much better team in 1987. Kyle says, I'd rather know you're going to be bad rather than thinking it's a playoff season. Yeah, this was a tough season. Of all the last 4 seasons, this one is the toughest because something real, like I was never sold on the team. I thought 22 was going to be something when they got off to the 13-5 start, but I wasn't sold on 2023. And something really, truly did feel different about this team. And now here we are, in counting of mediocre Giants baseball. It hurts. And this is definitely one of the most frustrating seasons in a while for the Giants. It's like, if you're wondering why I'm like having a hard time finding words, because it is hard to find words to describe it. Like I'm still digesting this. Like this entire season, even throughout May, June, and up to the All-Star break, the entire first half, it was the Giants are a good team. They're going to get it together. They're going to make a run. And then just bam. So suddenly. So sudden. And the season's basically over. 19 days after holding a playoff spot, they've given up on the season. And what hurts is because the Giants have only made the playoffs once in the last 9 years. And that this was finally going to be the team that got back to the playoffs and got the fans in San Francisco and throughout Northern California back into the team. I saw an excitement. We saw it a little bit early last year, but we really saw it this year, not just in San Francisco, not just in the Bay Area, but throughout Northern California. I saw a legitimate excitement from Giants fans throughout Northern California that I had not seen since 2018. And you just can't, help. Well, for a fact, they're not going to draw 3 million. 2 weeks from now, when the Padres come in, we're probably going to have crowds of 25,000. You're going to have probably crowds, possibly even the low 20,000s come September. And again, it's baseball. It's weird. Anything can happen, and I could be eating crow in 2 weeks. But the fact that they're about to trade a bunch of their guys, which is going to further decrease an already low morale, and the roster is going to get a lot less talented, forget about it. It's done. The 2025 season has ended as of today. This was it. I'm not gonna lie. Kyle says this sucks and painful. Is painful in June. I didn't think we'd be here. I was starting to get a little concerned at the end of June. And Kyle said FanFest was insane in Napa this year with so much excitement, and now we're here. Actually, I added so much. He just said with excitement. And the question is, what will the fan support be like next year? Because the Giants, they're going to have a lot of work to do this offseason. And changes need to be made. I think Pat Burrell has been a great Giant. And I think he has a role in this organization. Burrell's more of a scout than he is a coach. I think Burrell needs to replace this hitting coach. A week ago, I was torching people who suggested they needed to fire Bob Melvin. I'm starting to think it might be time to move on from Melvin. And the thing is, Melvin seems kind of burned out. As I've mentioned, he's managed 21 of the last 23 years. And Melvin just seemed really depressed last year when he was having to take orders from Farhan. But he has seemed like his energy has just been way down this year. And I think it's one of those situations like Bruce Bochy where, at the very least, he needs a few years off from managing. And Buster, I mean, that was not a good move on Buster's part to commit to Melvin for next year. And I think you do have to have a serious conversation about who's managing the team next year. And it'll be interesting to see how Melvin had a hard time in his pregame press conference today. Actually, now yesterday, we've crossed the Rubicon into July 31st. It's the final day of July. It's going to be August tomorrow. And speaking of which, it is July 31st, which means at 2:30 today, 2:30 Pacific, 3:30 Mountain, 4:30 Central, and 5:30 Eastern will be the 2025 Insomniac Lunatic Fringe Trade Deadline Show. Kyle will be actually on here as a guest. I'm hoping for maybe 2 or 3 other guests. But do join us for that. We're going to have live, real-time coverage of the trade deadline and the trades being made. And we're going to know a lot more. The trade deadline will be at 3 Pacific, 4 Mountain, 5 Central, 6 Eastern. We're going to know a lot more in just under 15 hours. As I said, I expect Duvall to be traded. I expect Duvall to be traded. I think there's a good chance Yastrzemski and or Wilmer Flores could get traded. Kyle, would you say the word rebuild here? It's not like a teardown because they still have a lot of pieces, and they're definitely going to go for it next year. I feel like this is kind of one of those where they're going to kind of enter a rebuild but compete phase. I would also trade Robbie Ray. I think you can get some good prospects out of Robbie Ray. And you can make up for that out of free agency. There are going to be a lot of pitchers on the market this offseason. Kyle says it's a retooling. I would call it a kind of a quasi soft core rebuild. Because Buster is definitely, today, and it was weird. I kind of felt happy when Buster made the trade for Tyler Rogers. Apparently, Buster went down to the bullpen to tell Tyler Rogers about it. And Taylor Rogers got traded from the Reds to the Pirates. So the Giants are going to face Tyler Rogers in New York, and they're going to face Taylor Rogers in Pittsburgh. Because this road trip is going to mimic the homestand. Friday through Sunday against the Mets, Monday through Wednesday against the Pirates. Now, the thing is with Rogers, he's going to be a free agent, and I do hope the Giants bring him back this offseason. The Giants didn't get the best prospects from the Mets. But a lot of people in New York think that they're overpaying and that this is a real go for the World Series kind of move by the Mets. Blade Tidwell, who was a right-handed pitcher, and Drew Gilbert, an outfielder, were the prospects. They might have even made their major league debuts already. Tidwell made his major league debut. And Drew Gilbert has not. But this is a good start. Duvall could get some solid prospects. I think Ray could get some good prospects. It's time to start. The Giants have the pieces to compete over the next year, 1 to 3 years. But start retooling, start building the farm system so that you have like a real strong team for 2029 and beyond into the 2030s. And next year, I think Birdsong could be a legitimate second or third starter. Landon Roop has potential, though I haven't made a final judgment on him yet. But sign a starter in place of Ray. And the Giants could still have a solid rotation next year. Bring Tyler Rogers back with Randy Rodriguez as the closer. The Giants could still have a very strong bullpen. You're going to probably have Bryce Eldridge up next season. Elliot Ramos will be 26 and will be entering the prime of his career. I think next year could really be Ramos' true breakout season. Jung-Hoo Lee, and that trio of Eldridge, Ramos, and Lee next season could be akin to that of Barry Bonds, Jeff Kent, and Alice Burks. I sincerely believe that. And I do think with the right moves, both with on and off-field personnel, players, coaches, perhaps front office, that next year's team could be a 90 to 100 win team. But the question is, what will fan support be like? If the Giants have another big offseason, will you see as many fans show up in April and May as they did this year? Something tells me we'll probably see less fans in April and May next year because people are going to feel like, we were teased these last 3 years. And we're not going to believe it until we actually see it. Changes definitely need to be made to personnel. Coaches, possibly the manager, and it pains me because I really respect Bob Melvin, and this is his dream job, and that's gonna really hurt. It's gonna be really tough for Melvin if he loses his dream job after 2 years. But at the same time, that's the cruel reality of baseball. And if Melvin's not the right man for the job, then he's not the right man for the job. And the NBC Sports Bay Area article, which was written by Alex Pavlovich, said it perfectly. The headline is, Giants know recent free fall forced front office's hand with Tyler Rogers' trade. And Kyle just backed it up by saying, none of this is Buster's fault. The player's performance didn't give him a choice. Buster had no choice. I think what happened was Buster inherited the team. I think he got a little kind of wanted to win now mode. They want to get the fans back. He got a little maybe overly aggressive. And then they kind of realized that we're still kind of dealing with the remnants of Farhan, and this core that Farhan has built that we have taken into win now mode just isn't a core that's built for win now. That's what I've been trying to say. This is a core that already is really not built to win now in 2 and is going to get old in a couple of years. So start rebuilding around them. Start kind of a retooling, a slight rebuild. And Buster, something tells me Buster is kind of starting, or is kind of, Buster has begun the soft core rebuild that should have begun at the end of 2017. And we can sit here and dwell. And what sucks about this too is when I started doing these shows for Sports Radio Service with real podcasting equipment and being able to do this with my press box access, and I was doing this expecting the Giants to be making a run at the playoffs. Just for the record, I've always been a diehard fan. I watched every game in 2017. I'm still going to be at the ballpark. It doesn't matter if the Giants lose 95 games. I'll be at the ballpark. I may or may not go to San Diego for the trip in 3 weeks. I haven't been to San Diego in a while. I love it down there. I might want to go see a couple games down there. And Kyle said perfectly, be ready for Buster to spend in free agency. Giants should really take a look-see at some of the players from Japan and Korea. There's a lot of pitching on the free agent market this offseason. Let's pull up the list here. And that's why I would trade Ray, because Ray's getting up in age. It's no guarantee he's going to give the same kind of season next year. He's signed through next year. I believe the Giants could get some solid prospects for Ray. I would trade Ray. I truly would. I seriously would. And you got Dylan Cease, who's going to be a free agent. Zach Gallen's going to be a free agent. Those are two guys. The Giants should try and sign one of those guys, Dylan Cease or Zach Gallen. And Kyle said, be ready for Buster to spend in free agency. He's shown he's not afraid to spend in the winter. That's where he can build a winner. Yes, the season is lost, but if Buster wants to win, go spend some money. Absolutely. And as I said, the next 3 years are going to be dedicated to the soft rebuild, the retooling, if you will. The retooling that really should have started at the end of 2017. It's going to start 8 years late, but better now than never. And what's good about today was, it was a roller coaster day. It was an emotional day. It's a bittersweet day. Really bitter because of just this season crashing and burning so quickly. And this may be the quickest a Giants season has ever crashed and burned. But sweet because one of my fears that Buster was too focused on winning now with not the greatest core of guys and was not concerned enough about the future, that fear has been thrown to the wayside. Buster is absolutely committed to the future. And Kyle said Berkeley, the whole reason we're in this situation is because of Farhan. It also didn't help that the Giants, this really should have happened after 2017. The collapse in 2016 and the 98 loss season in 2017 made it very obvious that the championship days were over and that the Giants needed to retool. And it was kind of similar. They still had some guys who had time left in them, like Buster and Brandon Crawford and Brandon Belt. The guy who they really should have traded after 17 was Bumgarner. They could have gotten some really big... I think the Giants could have even gotten Acuna for Bumgarner if they traded him that offseason to the Braves. Because Bumgarner came back from the dirt bike accident and his velocity was down. And I'm like, this guy's not the same, but the rest of the league doesn't know that yet. Kyle says, I don't want to hear anyone blame Buster for being dealt a hand of 16 in blackjack. I agree, but at the same token, that was not the smartest decision to commit to Bob Melvin next season. And if he does let Melvin go, that's not the best look for him. And you don't want just a year in to be given the reputation of a guy who's dishonest and who's not going to be true to his word. But at the same time, so Buster's in a bit of a quandary here because I am actually starting to think that Sam and others are right, that Melvin may not be the man for the job. And it'll be interesting to see how Melvin reacts. As I said, Melvin was having a hard time with his pregame press conference today. And of course, he probably already knew that the Tyler Rogers trade was going down. And I think he's talking about how at the beginning of the season, they were the team that they couldn't, you couldn't get the 27th out against. And I think he knew it was over. And what really was now Tuesday night, because now it's very early Thursday morning, when he talked about team meetings and said plural. That's when I knew, oh no, morale's really down. And then I went into the clubhouse prior to the game yesterday, and it wasn't like a horrible clubhouse, but it was quite different than the vibe that I got in April. Morale really just crashed in that club. And actually, that is what happened in 2022 and 2023. The clubhouse was really strong at the start of both those seasons, and the morale just came tumbling down. And 22, it kind of slowly came tumbling down. 23, it just came crashing down after Farhan did pretty much nothing at the deadline that year. And that was one of the things that really led to the collapse that season. And this year, it just seems like the morale came tumbling down. Because interesting was Monday when the Giants were making the late charge. The guys in the dugout were just like on their feet. They were on fire. They were like, "Here we go." They just lost the morale. And Kyle said, "At least Buster cares about players," which of course we both know Farhan didn't. Kyle said he also thought he was doing right by the players with Melvin coming back. And I think the players like Melvin. I just think Melvin lacks the fire. And I think Melvin, he's up in age. I think he's a little burned out, and I think he might need a couple years off. And it sucks because he grew up a Giants fan. He played with the Giants for 3 years from 86 to 88 under Roger Craig. And I just feel awful for Bob Melvin, a longtime baseball man who's dedicated his life to the game. But at the same time, you can't let your personal feelings and emotions get in the way. You have to do what's best for the team. And unfortunately, doing what's best for the team might include moving on from Bob Melvin. And I imagine if they do, it's going to be kind of done behind the scenes. And this is pure speculation because no one is behind the scenes. Not even BBWA guys are behind the scenes. No one's, but so this is all suspicion, but I suspect it will be done behind the scenes and will be done with the course of several weeks with a lot of conversations between Buster and Bob Melvin. And what I even wonder is if perhaps maybe Melvin will leave his post in the next few weeks. And then the question is, a lot of people, because Bruce Bochy's option or his contract's up with the Rangers at the end of this season, is to bring Bochy back. And that would be pretty cool. But I feel like Buster's now focusing on the long run. Bring in a young, old school manager who can be a stabilizing force and leader for years to come. Bochy was here for 13 years. Bring in a guy who can be here for 10 to 20 years. David Ross could be a guy. I think Brandon Belt, who's a very smart man. He's never coached before, and that'd be a real wild card. That'd be a real risk, but I'd be open to Brandon Belt managing the team. And I agree. Kyle says Bochy isn't the guy. And you and I have talked about this too, because it'll be interesting to see if Bochy wants to stick with the Rangers. Because the Rangers have their farm system's not the greatest. Their future, which looked so bright 2 years ago, is very much in limbo right now. They've come charging back. But, they're in a dogfight for the American League wildcard race. And Kyle and I were both you and I were both talking at the beginning of this month about how we both could see Bochy going to Arizona. Because the Diamondbacks, by the way, they just traded Eugenio Suarez to the Mariners. And I think Suarez was in Seattle in 22. That's a big move for the Mariners. I think the Mariners may get to the playoffs. They don't have the best team this year, but the American League's incredibly weak. And actually, all of Major League Baseball is turning out weak. The National League looked to be historically strong at the beginning of the season. Now the National League's turning out weak. Yep, he's with the Mariners in 22 and 23. I think the Astros win that division, but I think Seattle goes to the playoffs. Kyle says, I'm not sure about Arizona for Bochy now. Please do explain. Do you think they hold on to Lavelle? Because the thing is with the Diamondbacks, I imagine they got some damn good prospects for Suarez, and the Diamondbacks are in a position. Another kind of theme of this season has been good teams having bad years. Last year we had a couple, we had the Blue Jays have a bad year, but this year the Braves and the Diamondbacks. The Orioles. And I think if the Diamondbacks who already have a strong farm system, trading a couple guys and not doing a teardown could really put them in a position where I actually think they could become a powerhouse. And I do fully expect the Diamondbacks to contend again and possibly make the playoffs next year. I really do. Now, Kyle disagrees. He says the Diamondbacks are losing lots of guys to free agency at the end of the year, and the major league core that looked enticing from the outside isn't as great anymore. It'll be interesting to see how that happens. I feel like it's still good. I just feel like they're a good team having a bad year. I think the Diamondbacks will be back in it next year, but we'll just have to wait and see. It'll be interesting. You know, team I think could be good next year is the Rockies. Okay, I'm just kidding. I just had to do that. So how about the Rockies? You know, they were looking like they were gonna be over 100 games under 500, and they may even finish ahead of last year's White Sox. Now they might be able to finish with just a mere like 115 or 116 losses. Who knows? Maybe the Rockies could flirt with 63 wins next year. So yeah, maybe we'll see something from the Rockies next year. Maybe we'll see them not lose 100 next year. But yeah, so sorry if this post-game show tonight was a little awkward. It's just Kyle and I here, we're just digesting everything that's happened. And truly one of the just most sudden crashes and burn, probably the most sudden crash and burn I've ever seen from the Giants. In terms of where they were to where they're at now. This is the most sudden. I'm thinking about this is my 23rd season as a fully knowledgeable baseball fan, diehard Giants fan, and baseball lifer. And in my 23 years of watching this game on a daily basis, of course, I started watching in 01, became a real diehard fan at the 02, and then that offseason, that's when really I became just a genius with the game of baseball. So, as I said, like my true diehard fan baseball lifer status started with the beginning of the 2003 season. And in my 23 years of doing this, my 23 years of where baseball and the Giants have been my life, this is probably the most sudden crash and burn I've ever seen. And you could say, well, 2016 was, 2023 is certainly up there, or shall I say down there, but 19 days to go from a playoff spot, 3 days shy of the All-Star break, to season over, selling at the trade deadline. This was the most sudden crash and burn I've ever seen the Giants go through, and could even be considered one of the biggest crashes and burns in the history of the game. I mean, this is kind of an historic collapse the Giants have been on. The Giants have been on too many historic collapses, 2016, 2023, and now here in 2025. Kyle says, no, this is the worst one of my life as a Giants fan. When you say this is the worst one, do you mean the worst collapse, worst season? I mean, far from the worst season. 2006, the Giants had a horrible collapse, but they were 4 games over 500 and then lost 9 in a row and 16 and 19. What was weird about that season is they were 4 over after a win against the Padres on July 22nd. And then Armando Benitez blew the save on the 23rd on an 86-degree day at what was then AT&T Park. That was the first year in which AT&T Park was the name. They went 16 and 19. They were 9 games under 500. They then came charging back, were 2 games over 500, and then lost 13 of their final 15. And Gallo says, yes, collapse. So that'll do it. This has been your Insomniac Lunatic Fringe Giants post-game show. Join us today at 2:30 Pacific for the 2025 Insomniac Lunatic Fringe trade deadline show. And then at 7 o'clock tonight, we are going to do an official Insomniac Lunatic Fringe State of the Game show. We're still going to do pre and post games, or maybe a few pre, but mainly post games for Giants games going forward. It's possible with the Giants falling out of contention that we may do less post games. But you'll see. I was doing post games almost every night these last 2 weeks. I was doing like 5 or 6 the last 2 weeks. Probably expect somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 going forward. We'll still be on here. We'll still be talking Giants. And Kyle, before we go, Well, 2023, there were actually some high expectations. Kyle says in 2016, they still made the playoffs. 23, we didn't expect them to be anything. There kind of was at the start of that season. And of course, the guys that they signed that year, Michael Conforto. But how realistic do you think it is that the Giants finish over 500? Do you think the Giants could win 83 games? Do you think that is a realistic goal? And I get it. This is, the morale is just completely crashed. We're probably going to see a very different roster tomorrow night when the Giants take on the Mets at Citi Field. And the Giants are going to be going to play one of the best teams in the National League after they just got swept by the Padres. And don't be surprised if they're swept this weekend. At this point, I just hope the Giants can finish over 500. Finish this season strong and then have a strong offseason, be ready to go next year. And as I said, the next 3 years are kind of like rebuild and compete. And then, or shall I say, retool and compete. And then 2029 beyond, hopefully you have a core to take you 2029 through beyond. Kyle says, oh no, they'd be lucky to win 80 at this point. Yeah, I'm kind of feeling the same way, pal. There's about to be a lot of long, rough stretches over the next few months. Do you think this team could lose upwards of 85, possibly even 90 games? I would say they were to lose 90 games. They have 53 games left. They would have to go 18 and 35 in their last 53 games. Do you think something like that could happen? Because I do have an unfortunate feeling that these final 2 months could be pretty ugly. And in a way, maybe it's just best that it happens now so we can feel less crappy at the end of the season. But it's definitely going to hurt. And we're definitely going to spend the next 2 months and probably even 3, 4, 5 months. This one hurts. This has been one of the most painful Giants seasons in a long time. And this is a season that I take back what I said 30 seconds ago. It's probably even more painful that this happened. Well, it's good that it happened now because we could begin the retooling sooner. But worse that happened now because the longer we're going to have to dwell on it. We're going to have to be thinking about the next 2 months. And then, of course, once the season ends and we get into the off season and we're going back and we're looking back at this season, we're just going to be thinking about what the hell happened. Giants need to have a strong offseason, and there are going to need to be personnel changes. Kyle says with the regards of 85 to 90 losses, with how the bottom fell out, I don't put it past it from happening. I would say it's very possible. If you were a betting man, and I'm not endorsing gambling in baseball, I just use that as a metaphor. How many losses? What do you think is a final record for this team? If I were to make a guess, I'm gonna go with either 77 and 85 or 76 and 86. Kyle says 79 and 83. Well, that's not too bad. I'm hoping for 83 and 79. All right, Kyle, thank you so much for contributing, and we'll see Kyle on the air. He'll be live with us for our trade deadline special today at 2:30. For Kyle, for my boss, Lee Leonard at Sports Radio Service, because the Insomniac Lunatic Fringe is a production of Sports Radio Service. I'm Stephen Rubin. I hope you enjoyed my awkward musings as I grieve the sudden and tragic end and collapse of the 2025 San Francisco Giants. Have a good night, folks, and I will see you this afternoon.